with Dr. Brian.
We have tonight Dr. Brian King, and Brian is trained as a neuroscientist and psychologist, and for the past decade has traveled the world as a comedian and public speaker. Dr. Brian King hails from New York City and today resides in Dallas. He travels around a lot. It says in Dallas, Texas, with his wife, Sarah, and their young daughter. But I follow Brian on social media, and I can tell you he travels a lot. I don't know, Brian, are you still in Dallas?
I am, yeah, but I'm only here for like another month.
Yeah, so anyway, they lead a very nomadic life, and it's interesting to follow along if you want to try to find him on. He can tell you what social media he's on. But anyway, so let's welcome Dr. Brian King talking about his journey tonight.
Thanks for inviting me to do this. I settled in Dallas. She said I settled in Dallas before living here. I did live a nomadic lifestyle. My wife and I, we describe ourselves as nomads. I like to use the term gypsy, vagabonds, if you will. About 6 years ago, I was living in Los Angeles because I'm a comedian and I was trying to be famous. I had already been a public speaker for a few years at that point. For me, public speaking started out as a way to make a little extra money. It wasn't really what I was into. It wasn't what I wanted to do with my life, but it was like sort of just a gig that I picked up along the way. And at some point while I was living in Los Angeles, my speaking gigs really started to just take off. And I really started to enjoy them more than other activities, so much so that I was hardly ever in my apartment in LA. And so 6 years ago, I got the idea. Is like, you know what? Why should I pay rent on an apartment I'm never in? I live out of hotels, pretty much 300 days out of the year anyway. Why don't I go ahead and just, for the time that I'm not, booked to do anything, just go ahead and stay in extended rental, and I met my partner, Sarah. She was kind of in a similar boat. And so we both decided to get rid of our homes, spend our time traveling the world full time. And we became effectively homeless. The pandemic put an end to that. When they tell you to shelter at home and you don't have a home, you kind of got to scramble. And so our gigs were canceled. Our livelihood was canceled. And so everything kind of came crashing. And we decided, well, where should we go? She was previously living in Florida. I was previously living in California. But we weren't really convinced that either of those places were where we wanted to be during the pandemic, based on what was happening. We ended up actually moving to Texas, and we've been to Texas now for about a year and a half. As Kimberly mentioned, I did post recently that I'm leaving the country soon. Years ago, we bought a condo in Canada that we've never been able to live in. Our original idea was that we would have it to stay in whenever we weren't on tour. But we were just so successful that we were on tour constantly. And that's not really a bad problem to have. That's kind of a good problem. But we never actually got to even spend a single night in this beautiful property that we purchased in Montreal, Canada. And so instead of having an empty property sitting in Canada, we decided to rent it out. And thankfully, that worked out positively for us. We've had renters through this entire pandemic, which was nice. But they've decided to move on. So we decided that we're going to leave our apartment that we're renting here in Dallas and go live finally in the home that we own in Montreal, Canada, at least for a few months anyway. I don't know that I have that much wisdom to share with writers. I am a writer and I don't really feel like a writer. I kind of fell into writing, if you will. And I think if I have any wisdom to share, or any overall message, it's that there's no one path to success. I do give people maybe who haven't had a sort of traditional upbringing or education or whatever, I kind of give them a little hope that you can overcome different obstacles and so forth. And so I've had lots of obstacles to overcome to get where I am. I titled this presentation as becoming a successful writer by making all the wrong choices. When it comes to my writing career, I never made a good choice. I've actually made, I'm not saying bad choices, and nothing I regret, of course, but I've done things in a way that you would not want to recommend. I have always had an interest in writing. Whether or not I pursued it with any sort of real effort is is debatable, of course. I've done some things that you could call writing. I don't know that I ever really set out to be a writer. I imagine some of you probably write every day. You're writing a poem, you're writing a couple pages of a novel or a short story or essay, and I wish I had that kind of discipline. I really do. I remember growing up, I had what I describe now, because I'm a psychologist, but I describe now as an undiagnosed case of attention deficit disorder. Now I think of it as a strength, but obviously it was something that got in the way of being able to do certain things when I was younger. I was unable to focus. I was unable to keep my attention on any one particular task, and so that actually led to one of the first, what I would call, wrong choices that got me to where I am today. I ended up dropping out of high school. I can't remember what was going through my head at the time. I just remember I didn't like being in high school and I didn't want to be there anymore. And I probably wasn't going to graduate anyway. So I figured, what was the point of sticking around? So dropping out of high school was like the first poor choice, I guess, that led me to where I am today. And I say poor choice in that I don't regret anything. Everything was a decision that led me down a certain path. But I wouldn't recommend, if you want to be a professional writer, if you want to be, a successful author, I don't recommend taking this route. It's just my term for it. And about a year of working fast food restaurants and other horrible jobs and living in a pretty horrible lifestyle. I had an apartment at one point with 5 roommates, and none of them were on the lease. And I don't remember who was actually my roommate and who was just somebody crashing. It's just one of those kind of flop houses, After about a year of living like that, I decided I didn't want to live like that anymore. And so I ended up getting my GED and slipping into college at a community level, sort of taking a convoluted route to getting to where a lot of you are. I would imagine some of you probably even knew you wanted to be a writer, went to college, studied creative writing, studied literature, all that stuff. That wasn't me, but I knew I wanted to write. One thing that I think is really interesting is that at some point in college, I got this crazy idea to write a book. And I remember, I remember announcing to my roommates and friends and family and so forth. It's like, hey, I'm going to write a book. And I said, well, what are you going to write a book for? I was like, I don't know. I just have a need to write a book. And at the time, I used to have a very firm belief that all smart people should write at least one book. And I don't know how I got that idea in my head, but it was an idea that I had there. And I don't know that I agree with it necessarily now. But I felt that, hey, I'm smart. I should write a book. And I remember I would try really hard to write a little bit every day, whether it was a sentence or a paragraph, or whether I was just reviewing yesterday's work or whatever. I would make a point to sit down at my computer, and this is sometime in the mid 90s, so the computers were pretty crummy, and I would just bang out stuff on keys, and I started writing a book. Why does anybody do anything? I had this internal drive that I wanted to produce. I wanted to put ideas that are in my head on paper, and I didn't really understand how to communicate that to people very well. One guy I remember saying, like, oh, you think people are going to read this? And I was like, I don't know if people are going to read it. I have no idea. I just feel like I need to express it, and I need to accomplish something, because dropping out of high school, slipping into college, and almost failing out of college, I felt like I needed to have some kind of tangible accomplishment. As I slipped into college, I ended up slipping into graduate school. I somehow got to the end of my bachelor's degree and realized, there's not a whole lot you can do with a bachelor's degree in psychology. Not that many doors are opening up for me. And so I decided to just, throw some applications out for my doctorate. So I took the GRE, and if you've taken that, this. They give you your scores, and then as part of your payment to take the GRE, they will send your scores to 3 schools I think it was 3. And I started looking at all the schools that had psych programs that I was interested in or even remotely interested in. And most of them had already passed their deadline for admissions because that's the kind of student I was. And there was literally 4 schools whose deadline did not pass yet. I got a letter from the University of New Orleans that I got in there, and I was so surprised and so grateful because I really wasn't expecting it in. I was a terrible student. I had a terrible history before that. I had never done anything significant academically. Again, coming from a background of a person who had been dealing with what it was classified as a learning disorder his entire life, you can imagine I just wasn't that confident in my ability to do certain things. And I slipped into a doctoral program in neuroscience, which is, you could not be further removed from wanting to be a creative writer by going into a neuroscience program, learning of intricacies about the brain and doing surgery on rats. It's just a weird thing to even think about. That used to be my life. During that time, I sent off that novel that I wrote in college to about 100 different publishers. I remember sending off my query letters. I had a book. I forget what the name of the book was. This is pre-internet. This is before the internet. So I can't remember what the book was, but it was a guide to publishers all across the country. And so I would send off query letters to all these publishers. And at some point I would send, at some of them would request the first 50 pages of the book or so forth. And so I remember doing all these printing and sending and the mail and all these expenses racking up. And every single one of them flat out rejected me. A couple of years later, I got my PhD. And around that time, I was walking into a Barnes and Noble. At the front door, they had this stack of flyers, and there was this brand new technology that was being introduced called print on demand publishing. And it said, print your novel for, I think it was $90, or it was an introductory offer, special offer, $90. So I did that. I self-published, and next thing I knew, people were reading my book. It was crazy. It was something that I wasn't expecting. I would get emails, and I would get messages from people who said that they read it, they enjoyed it, they got a lot out of it. One guy said that he was up all night reading it, and I just thought, wow, that's crazy. And let me tell you about my book. It is terrible. I self-published it, and then they said for an additional fee, I can have an editor, go through my book and edit it for me. Well, I was a broke grad student at the time when I did this. So I opted against the editor. Now, every time I pick up that book, I find a spelling or grammatical error, and it pisses me off. And so I actually had to take it off of circulation. So I got this PhD. Because of the nature of the way I entered graduate school and college in general, you can imagine that, being a high school dropout, it's not like they were throwing scholarships at me. That one of the downsides of dropping out of high school is that you were just ineligible for any kind of scholarships at that point. So I ended up graduating with an enormous amount of student loan debt that I needed to pay off. And the best way I could do that with my PhD was to get into consulting. And so I started working consulting. I spent about 10 years. There's 2 things about being a consultant that are important to where I got to today. One is that it took me to San Francisco, and the other is that I absolutely hated it. I didn't like the world I was in. I didn't like the work I was trying to do, but I felt like I had to do it because I had this enormous financial burden. And so that led to depression. And then it was fortunate enough that I found myself in San Francisco. One day, I was walking from my office, and I was walking down. I lived in North Beach, and so my office was in the financial district. So I was walking down to my apartment, and I passed a sign that said open mic comedy. My friend said, "Hey, didn't you always want to be a comedian?" And I was like, I have. I've always really tried that. I just kept putting it off because I thought I needed to get my education first, and then do something more substantial in my life. It's like, well, why don't you give it a try? And I got on that stage, and something clicked. Something clicked in my head. I should have been doing this the whole time. And when I got off that stage, and I did okay, I got a few laughs, but when I got off that stage, I realized, and I didn't care about the fact that I have this education. I didn't care about any of those things. I just wanted to make people laugh, and I wanted to be happy and enjoy myself. I started devoting so much time to doing stand-up comedy that I was fired from my job literally like 3 weeks later. At that point, I had comedian friends who were waiting tables, and they seemed perfectly happy. And I was like, you know what? If they could be happy waiting tables, then so can I. I can sling burritos in the Mission. I could do whatever. That never happened for me because shortly after I got fired, I actually got a call from the owner of a public speaking company. Said, "Hey, is this Dr. Brian King?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "I heard that you are a psychologist who is also a stand-up comedian." I said, "Yep." I said, "I got a proposition for you. How would you like to do some talks on psychology and make them funny, travel different places?" And as soon as I was pitched that, I was like, "I'm in. Of course I'm in. That's exactly what I want to do with my life." That led to a 10-year career as a public speaker, traveling the country. I've been everywhere. I've been every city in the United States. I've been all over Canada. I've been in Australia. I've been to Europe. My public speaking subjects have become books. My first nationally published book was The Laughing Cure, this book right here. The Laughing Cure was published in 2015, and I can't tell you how to get a publisher because I didn't get this publisher. They came to me. And one day I was, after my seminar, somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, I'm a literary agent. Have you ever thought about writing a book?" And I said, "Of course I've thought about writing a book." I told him about my dumb little novel that I wrote in college. And he said, "Well, I think you'd be great. You're a good speaker. I think you'd be great." And the next thing I knew, like a week later, I was on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles, and I was signing my very first book deal. That first check, that book advance, was like the best money I've ever earned. Like better than anything else. It was just so satisfying that somebody was going to pay me to write a book. And I spent 3 months working just like I did in college, every day, trying to write a little bit a day. The book came out. It did okay, did moderate. It led me to the opportunity for a couple years later to write this book right here, The Art of Taking It Easy. I love both of these books. I put a tremendous amount of work into both of them, but really, honestly, this is my baby. This is the one. I mean, I like them both. You know how if you're a parent, you got more than one kid, there's always going to be one you like more, but you're never going to admit it in public. And unfortunately, this book came out right before the pandemic, which I don't know if you remember, but when the pandemic started, people stopped buying things like books. That was really unfortunate timing. But one thing about this book that made it successful is that the publisher had already signed contracts with international publishers for translating the book into different languages and releasing it in different markets. And so we had Germany already signed, Portugal, Poland, Brazil, a couple of other places already signed up that were going to publish the book locally in their markets. And since the contract was signed, they had to do it. But during the pandemic, they wanted to wait, obviously. This is a book about managing stress. And for those of us who recall the past 2 years, it was pretty stressful. There's a lot of stress. And so I think being released in those markets in the middle of the pandemic was way better than being released in the United States right before the pandemic. It was an international bestseller for 2 months, for a solid 2 months. I was in the top 10, and then I got bumped because Barack Obama wrote a book. Of course, his book comes out, and everybody wants to read Michelle Obama's book again. I don't feel too bad about getting bumped out of the top 10 by those three. Anyway, so that's been my experience as a writer and a publisher. I recently pitched another book to follow up these two to a publisher, and it looks like that one's going to be a go. I'm trying to write the pitch actually today to get that out to my publisher, hopefully before I fall asleep tonight. But yeah, that's how I became a successful writer, by making all bad choices.